Hey everybody, it's Joe Helly, the mayor, and today we're going to talk about how we can create a simple project for resolving DNS in Python. Recently, I've released a few different projects. You may have seen them on Twitter, in my Discord, or other places. The first one is O365 User Finder, which is a tool that enumerates valid users within the O365 user space, as well as MS Dork Dump, which is a Google dork dump tool that goes out and searches for files and then downloads them and inspects metadata. And then finally, MS Scan, which is a tool that will resolve DNS as well as do some subdomain enumeration. So I've gotten a lot of requests when I've released these projects for information on how to develop them. And that's something that I really didn't think about when I was creating them, but I thought that it was a really good idea to try to jump into when we, or just in general, so other people can learn what I'm doing and to see how they can do it as well. So, first and foremost, we're going to need a developmental space, and it doesn't matter if you're on Windows, Linux, or Mac. Um, you'll need some sort of text editor that can save as Python. Here, for instance, you can see we're using Visual Studio Code, which I really recommend. It's a great tool. Alternatively, you can use something as simple as Notepad or Notepad++. You can use Sublime or Note, any of those tools. Whichever one you want to use, though, just make sure you got some familiarity and some comfort. Additionally, you'll need a way to run commands. Visual Studio Code has a run space built into it that we can just go ahead and run commands from a command line debugger terminal here. Otherwise, you can use something like the command prompt if you're on Windows, or you can use your terminal if you're on Linux or Mac. So if we're going to build a tool and we got the idea for the tool in hand, in this case, a DNS enumeration tool, we need to consider what we might need in order to make this project work. And what I'm talking about here is like libraries, right? So for Python, Python DNS, um, what we're doing with DNS on Python, excuse me, we will need the DNS Python library. And we can get that information from dnspython.org. And if we go to that site, we can see, it's a DNS toolkit for Python. This is something that's been developed by somebody else or another team for public use. And then typically what I do, since we're talking about some of the mindsets that I have going through this process, is to look at examples. And here you can see we can get an idea of some of the syntax and methodologies that go into using this library with our project. So we see that we need to import DNS Resolver. And this snippet of code here is getting the mail target and preference of a name. So we're setting a variable answers, and then we're resolving that domain and the mail server to it. So when we talk about DNS resolution, it would be impossible for us to simply remember every IP address for every website we want to go to. Would you be able to remember, YouTube's IP address and Gmail's IP address and, Microsoft Teams IP address? And the answer is no. It would be impossible to do so. So we have DNS resolution, which essentially is a way for name servers, for users to reach out to a name server that maintains a repository of these host names to IP addresses, and the name server does that heavy lifting for us. So we make a request to the name server with the domain name, and it resolves the IP address, etc. So what we're going to do is we need to come back to our workspace, and we need to import DNS.resolver. And if you're in Visual Studio Code, you can see that you do get some verbosity with some error messages and other things. Here, for instance, I spelled resolver wrong. So we need to make sure that we spell that right. And then once we do get import DNS resolver. And if we're not using the import, we could remove that. But in this case, we're going to be using it. So I'll just go ahead and put it back. But this is one of the many good things about Visual Studio Code. It really is exceptional for helping you develop projects. So we have our import, and if you remember from the instructions on DNS Python, we need to set a variable. So let's set a variable answer, and then dns.resolver.resolve. And then we're just going to do youtube.com. And then we're going to look for an A record. And just briefly, when we talk about records, A records are your IPv4 address, right? So your regular TCP IP address that you would typically think of in your head. There's going to be other IP addresses. There's going to be AAAA, which is going to be IPv6. We saw MX for mail servers, NS for name servers, etc. And we'll touch on those a little bit later. But just know that this will be our record. And then we need to set a for statement. So we're going to do for server in answer. And we need to pay attention to our spacing here, right? So for Python, it's very, very specific when it comes to spacing syntax. It's going to be 4 spaces, just as you see there. And then we're going to do a print, and then we need to do server to text. And if we click on server, we can see other places within our script or our code where server as a variable has been used. Over here, I'm highlighted over top of print, and it tells what print does. So if you're learning Python, this is really, really good because you get a decent idea of what's going on here. And here we see the print function. If we come up here to the DNS resolver.resolve, it also tells us somewhat of what we're looking for. So again, we see function resolve, and then it's got the queue name, it's got all different kind of information, and it says it queries name servers to find answer to the question. And that's exactly what it's doing here. So let's go ahead and save our project. And then if you're in Visual Studio Code, you can just hit F5. You'll have to pick a debug file, and I'm picking Python. And down here, you can see our project beginning to run. And you can see that it comes back with an IP address. So if you're not using Visual Studio Code, don't fret. Just go ahead and change to the directory that you saved your file in. And in this case, I just saved it to my desktop. And then you can just run Python 3, and we'll just do demo DNS.py. And you can see that it resolves just like that. So if you're doing this on Kali Linux or Ubuntu or Raspberry Pi or a Mac, just go ahead and run Python 3 from here. If you got an error saying that the DNS Python or Python DNS is not installed, this is an easy fix really quick. So we can just do pip3 install DNS Python. And you'll see for me it's already installed, so I get a message saying that. You might not get that message, it might just install for you. You might also get a message saying that you need to run it with sudo or elevated privileges, so just keep that in mind. So again, if we run Python demo DNS, it resolves our IP address. But this is kind of inconvenient for us, right? We don't want to have to open this file every single time we want to resolve an IP address. We want to be able to run it from, like the command line terminal, where we would do Python demo DNS and then type in something like youtube.com. What we can do is we can import another library called sys, and we'll go ahead and do that. And if we hover over top of it, we get more information. It provides access to objects used or maintained by the interpreter and the functions that interact strongly with it. Here is what we're going to look for our usage is argv. This is going to allow us to set up a command line argument to read into a variable. So if you scroll down, you can see some other information. We're not going to use any of this for what we're doing though. So we want to change this YouTube so we don't have to type it in every time to make sure that we can put YouTube down here on the command line. So we need to set a new variable, and let's set our variable to domain, and we're going to make it equal to sys.argv1. And you might be wondering why we're going to do argv1. It's because we have to look at the arguments within our command line. So here we have Python 3. This does not get counted. Get out of here. This does not get counted as part of our system argument, but the 0 value in the system argument is actually going to be our script or our program we're going to run. And then every value after that will be +1. So if this is 0, this will be 1. And if we put test, that would be sys.argv2. If we put ABC, that would be sys.argv3. So it's just iterative, and it adds 1 each time. Now that we've added this domain, we need to replace youtube.com with just the variable domain. And now what this does is this value, as you can see, it links to this variable up here. Now when we run our DNS name resolution, it will look at this domain and then it will refer back to the variable within our Python script and pull it from here. So let's go ahead and save again. And now instead of running just demo DNS, we're going to run demo DNS youtube.com. And you can see that we get an IP address back that's successfully resolved it. But again, this is additional work for us, right? We don't want to have to open this up to type in A every time, or mail, or name server. We want to be able to simply just enter it and kind of set it and forget it, right? So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to set up a simple array. So we can do something like record types equals, but we need to know our records, right? So if you're thinking through the process of generating this program on your own and you're going through that research process, we need to think about, okay, what DNS records are there? So let's bring back our browser window. And here you can see that I've just Google searched DNS record types, and I've selected one that I thought would be beneficial. And we can see here that we have commonly used record types. We have A, AAA, alias, CNAME, etc. You can click on these to get more information about what they are, and I encourage you to do that on your own. So what we need to do is we need to enter these values into an array. So the way we do that is we encapsulate each one in single quotes. So let's do A. And again, A is our simple TCP/IP v4 record, right? So that's going to return us this regular IP address that we see down here. If you see these changing, that's simply because the name server has resolved that domain to multiple IP addresses. This is very common. So we have A, we're going to do AAAA, which is our IPv6 resolution. Let's do, I'm going to pull up my tool so I can just see what I used over there. Oh, you pain. Okay, we have AAA. Let's do name server. We want to be able to enumerate name servers. Let's do CNAME for canonical name. Let's do MX for mail servers to see if we can resolve any mail servers. We'll do PTR for pointer records. We'll do SOA. And we will do TXT for text records. And this is an array. So what we need to do now is input a for statement that will iterate through each one of these records in order for our program to read them, right? If we try to run this right now, we just put this A and we replace A with record types, we're going to get an exception or an error. And it's going to say there's this symbol is not supported between instances of lists and integers. And this is simply because we haven't provided a way for our program or our script to iterate through each one of these record types. So we see that we have 4 here. This is actually a loop, right? What we're going to do is we're going to generate a second loop of 4 statements. So we need to do 4, and we'll just do records in record types with a colon. But now you see over here we got this squiggly, right? Expected indented block. So if you're in Visual Studio Code, you can go ahead and just highlight everything you need to indent, and you can do Control and then right bracket, and it'll auto indent it once one indent space to the right. And again, in Python, that's 4 single spaces. So now we have 4 record and record types answer DNS resolve domain record types. The problem is we don't want to iterate or call record types. We want to call records, right? Because we're looking for records in record types. So this for statement will loop through each one of these record types. So we need to replace record types with records. And now if we save, and I'm just going to clear this down here, and we run our program again, we should see that we get all kinds of information back for different domain name resolution. We also get an error though, right? So let's scroll up first and we'll look. We get an IP address, we get IPv6, and we get some name servers, but we find an error. And when we think about errors, we need to build in some exceptions. We don't want our program to simply look like this when we're running it for a couple of reasons. One, the program just ended. We didn't get anywhere past CNAME, so we didn't check for mail records, pointer records, SOA, or TXT. So when we want to use exceptions, we can research that, right? Okay, I want to get rid of this DNS resolver.noAnswer we need to use a try except statement. And what we're going to do is the try block lets you test a block of code for errors. And then the except block, or exception for what we'll use, uh, allows you to handle that error. So instead of just killing the program when we reach this error, we can pass it. We can quit. We can do nothing. We can do a print statement and say, this record doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and do that with this iteration of our code now. So for record and record types, what we can do is we can enter a try block here. And again, we have this red squiggly line that says we expect an indent. So let's go ahead and highlight this. And we'll indent every line 4 spaces to the right. I'm going to look at my code over here just because I want to get this correct for everybody. And now what we need to do is we can enter, and we need to go back to the same line as the try. We need to make sure that we're on the same indent for the block. And when we use a try block, it expects an expect block at the end, or an accept block, excuse me. So what we can do is we can look at this error here and we can see DNS resolver.noAnswer. This means that that record did not get an answer. So we can do except DNS.resolver.noAnswer. So what this is saying is if this try block finds this exception anywhere, it's going to do something. And for us, let's do something with that, right? So let's go ahead and hit enter. And I got some squiggly lines there, so we'll get rid of those. And let's print. We can print something such as no answer found or no record found. And then we can do pass. And what pass will do is simply move on to the next iteration in the for loop. So now if we save, and we'll clear this out again, we can run this again, and we should hopefully not get a DNS resolver no answer error within our script or our code. So there you see that we got no record found, and then we're getting additional no records found. This is great for debugging, just simply so you can understand that something is missing there. Do we really want this to say no record found, especially since it's not specific? And the answer for me is no. So let's go ahead and delete that. And what will happen is, instead of this saying no record found, nothing will happen. It will just pass into that statement. Let's make our program a little prettier now, right? So we have a functional shell here. It's looking for records, but we don't really know necessarily what some of these records are when we're looking at it. And what we can do is we can enter another print function to print each time what the type of record is. So if we have our answer here, and we want to be at the top of our for loop, right? If we put a print statement down here, every time a record is printed, it will print 6, 7, 8 times, or as many times as this records exist down here. But if we come up and we go under answer, what we can do is we can enter a print function, and let's just go ahead and print. We're going to use F for F string, and an F string will allow us to call a variable into our text. So we're going to do F, and then inside of our single quotes, let's go ahead and do records. And what this is going to do is this is going to call from our records variable here, and this records variable here is calling the iteration inside of the array. And then let's just type records. And what this will do is tell us what records are being printed next. And let's go ahead and, just for a little bit more decorative sake, let's also print some dash lines. So we'll just do dash times 30. And let's go ahead and hit save. Oops. We need to make sure our records here is within is encapsulated within our single quotes. Let's go ahead and hit save. Let's clear. And we'll run our tool again. And now you can see it's printing A records, it's printing 4A records, name server records, etc. So it's kind of separating those. We can go one step farther just to make this a bit more readable. And where we have print server to text, let's go ahead and add a plus sign. And then inside single quotes, let's add a new line. And what this will do is simply add a new line underneath each one of our records so that it's a bit easier to read and understand. So one more time, we'll just print this again. And you can see now there's a space. It just really makes it a bit easier to read. However, there's also a space in between these. That's going to be up to you to go ahead and see if there's a way for you to be happier with how that reads out, and see if there's a way that you enjoy the way it looks. One of the ways that I would do it, if it was simply me, is instead of having 4 records here, let's go ahead and just add a new line, and we can hit enter again, and that'll just add a new line up top at each record, and you can see how that space works. So that's how I'll do it. You can do it any way you would like. And here we have another error, right? So I went ahead and I just did a Control C, and we have keyboard interrupt. We don't want keyboard interrupt to be showing everywhere in our script, because honestly, it just kind of looks yucky, right? So let's go ahead and enter a new script here, or a new exception, and let's do except and keyboard interrupt. And if you're using Visual Studio Code, you see I just did an autocomplete. Otherwise, you have to type this in with whatever text editor you're using. And accept keyboard interrupt, and now we can do just quit. So instead of all this jumbled mess, if we just do a Control C, the program will just quit. Me, I like to throw in a little message. If you've used any of my tools, you can see something fun in there. Little Easter egg I'll do. Something like either you fat fingered this or you meant to quit. Either way, goodbye. And this is just something I build into each of mine. And if we run that, we can see how that turns out. And there you go. So either you fat fingered this or you meant to quit. Either way, goodbye. That's just something that I throw in there for a little bit of jest and for fun. You don't have to do that. You can certainly do it however you'd like. So one more thing we need to build in is, what if we get a domain name wrong, right? What if our domain name doesn't exist? So what if we do YouTube blah blah blah.com? We see here that we get an exception back that says DNS Resolver NX domain does not exist. Well, we don't want this showing up every time we get a domain name wrong, or that a domain name we're looking for just simply doesn't exist. We want it to gracefully quit or exit. So what we can do is we can add another exception, right? We're getting pretty good at those. So let's do accept DNS.resolver NX domain. And again, we're looking at this error here. And you have to type it in exact. If you don't type this in exact, you might have problems. So let's do DNS resolver.nx domain. And if that's the case, we can enter in some verbosity to let us know exactly what happened here, right? So just like we have here, DNS resolver no answer, we just used a pass. Here where we have DNS resolver NX domain, we want the user or ourselves to know that this was actually an issue and why it didn't work for us. So let's go ahead and do our F string, and we'll do domain. And what we're doing here again is we're calling back from our domain variable up here. So if we click it, we can see that it's linked to this variable. And here we can say domain does not exist. And now if we save and we run this again, we're just going to go ahead and clear this because that kind of looks crappy. We should get a message back that simply says the domain does not exist. Hopefully. Okay, so we have to actually put, I think, a quit statement in here. I apologize. Let's try this. Okay, so it didn't print, but it simply just quit. So, and that's because I don't have print, right? I gotta have print in here. So let's try this one more time. I apologize. And you can see even people who are making these things, you gotta kind of have to work through the code. And here you see that it does come back with the exception message that we printed here, it does not exist. So this would tell us that we need to check our domain name or something else. Finally, what happens if we don't use a domain name? So if we go ahead and just run it, we're going to get index error, right? Domain sysargv1. Index list is out of, or list index is out of range, meaning that it cannot find this one value because it doesn't exist. We need to create another exception for this, but we have to add it to the domain name itself, or the domain variable. So what we can do is we can do a try statement or a try block like we did below. But now we need to indent our domain and then add an accept statement. So accept index error, as we see down here, is the classification of our error. So let's do accept index error. And if this is the case, let's go ahead and print syntax error. And then we'll do Python 3 DNS or demo DNS.py, and then we'll just do domain name. So now, and then we need a quit statement, right? We have to make sure that our program quits gracefully. So now if we try this again, we should see that syntax error, Python 3 demo DNS domain name. So now we have some basic exception handling for that portion of our code too. So if we're just blazing through this too quickly and we see that, and we forget to put a domain name in, or whoever is using our program forgets to put a domain name in, we can simply see that we get a syntax error in the proper way to do it. So again, if we just do youtube.com, we should see the full effect of our script and what we've created today. So we'll let this run. I really appreciate you checking in and watching the video today. I hope you learned something. I've learned a lot, not only creating these projects, but also coming back and doing it from a teaching perspective as well. I encourage you to tinker with this, right? If you want, you can look on GitHub, and I'll go ahead and clear this, and we'll just do github.com, Divus, and then it's msdns scan. If you go to that link, you can see the full project. And for me, I will be doing another video in the near future, how to do subdomain enumeration, because I think that's really, really neat as well. And I'll show you guys how to do that with Python. So look forward to that video next. I really appreciate you all coming to join me today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Until then, take care.